I'm guessing everyone else has also experienced the fact that when you go to the grocery store nowadays, half the things that you want are out of stock. Or have you noticed the price of hamburger or chicken has gone up one week, down the next? In the news, they keep showing us these pictures of ships waiting to get into port, and somehow this signifies the supply chain crisis. But what do those foreign ships have to do with the lack of domestic food items in my local grocery store? It goes without saying that America's supply chain has been strained due to the pandemic, but I have yet to see anyone speak with intelligence about why our domestic supply chain is so out of whack. Our supply chain is a very complex ecosystem, where small, minor swings can have a large whip-like effect. In turn, these effects have a direct correlation on product availability as well as the massive increases in cost. But you're in luck. No, I don't have an easy solve for the issue, but I can help explain it in a little bit more detail. Seeing as how I've worked in supply chain for the past 15 years with companies such as Albertsons, Target, and Amazon, I'm going to attempt to give you a little bit more specific details on how the domestic supply chain is impacted and how this results in higher costs to the rest of us. Let's jump right in with layoffs and furloughs from the pandemic. At the beginning of the pandemic, manufacturers, transportation companies, and warehouses were laying off employees due to the major declines in product demand. We all lived it. We all know what happened. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, by April of 2020, the full impact of unemployment from the pandemic had occurred within the civilian unemployment rate, going from 3.5% in January 2020 to 14.7% in April of 2020. The area hit hardest with layoffs was leisure and hospitality, with 8.1 million unemployed in April 2020, and it made up 36% of all unemployed. With regards to demographic of those unemployed, the Hispanic Latino Americans were impacted most, with unemployment rates going from 4.3% in January 2020 to 18.8% in April of 2020. That's a delta of 14.5%. The age bracket hit hardest by unemployment was teenagers aged 16 to 19, with unemployment going from 12.2% in January to 32.6% in April. That's a delta of 20.4%. And finally, the gender hit hardest by the unemployment spurred by the pandemic was women 20 years and older, going from 3.2% unemployment in January to 15.4% in April, with a delta of 12.2%. People that were furloughed or laid off began looking for other forms of work in sectors that weren't impacted as much from the pandemic, such as government or utility work. This shift in employment sectors created a vacuum in the sectors that were predominantly part of the supply chain and service-oriented. It stands to reason that a good portion of the truck drivers, warehouse workers, service, and manufacturing employees simply found roles in different sectors, and quite honestly, they may never come back. Now there's the topic of the Great Resignation, or as I like to put it, the Great Reprioritization. This one hits close to home because I quit my high-paying tech job at the beginning of the pandemic, but I made a video about it, so if you want to know more, go check it out. So getting into the meat of the Great Resignation. Comparing the numbers of people quitting jobs in the month of December 2021 to December 2020, it is a 27% increase. The number of people quitting throughout 2021 was at a similar rate as December, and this has been referred to as the Great Resignation. People are choosing different paths of work that provide them a better form of satisfaction. However, this opens a further gap in labor shortages across all sectors of business, but more heavily in retail that had a 38% increase in quitters December of 2021 versus 2020. Food service, 34% increased quitters, and trade, transportation, and utilities, a 32% increase. The newer generation of employees value their time and their job satisfaction more than ever. If you don't like your work situation, you have more leverage than you've ever had before to either ask for what you want or move on to a company that offers what you do want. Next is a topic that few cover, but it is a reality for our economy and our workforce, and that is immigration. Lawful immigration has been declining since 2016. In 2020, the immigration was at 707,000, which is a drop of 31% from 2019 and a drop of 40% from 2016. The labor pool from legal immigrants has declined at a consistent rate for several years, and many immigrants filled positions in sectors that have shown the greatest decline during the pandemic. The next area is near and dear to my heart, and that is early retirement, which is also an area that I fall into. Boomers and a handful of Gen Xers such as myself have been retiring early due to the pandemic, which causes both a void in employment, but also a major shift in wealth for other generations to move up. According to Pew Research Center, retirement among those 55 and older grew 2% from Q3 2019 to Q3 2021. Now I realize that doesn't seem like a whole lot, but this is roughly 1.2 million more people that chose to retire in 2021 versus 2019. For now, they are currently out of the workforce, but with the stock market dipping into recessionary waters, many have speculated that early retirees may be boomeranging back into the workforce. And I sure hope that's not me. In 2022, during the first 12 weeks of the year, I spent nearly the first 10 weeks of that simply taking care of my children due to COVID exposure, snow days, fevers, or sadly getting COVID-19 itself. It's a good thing that I'm retired because if I wasn't, either my wife or I would have probably had to have quit our jobs just to watch the children. Sadly, our family situation isn't unique. This is what every family in the US was probably dealing with. We've all lived through the changing protocols associated with an exposure to a positive case or even having COVID itself. The amount of time spent in quarantine due to an exposure or an illness can vary depending on the rules of the CDC, one's workplace, school, or even daycare. Even then, it can range anywhere from 10 to 15 days per exposure. Families with young children have a much larger impact from these policies, which often requires a parent to stay at home permanently until the pandemic has passed. If a parent is unable to work from home, then it may result in them having to quit their jobs. Ergo, it contributes to the labor shortage. The sooner we can get past all of these high infection rates, the sooner the workforce can normalize. As the pandemic had occurred, people stopped going out to restaurants, traveling, vacation, and basically any form of socializing. Everyone was hunkering down in their homes, and thankfully many of the professional jobs were allowed to work from home. These factors caused a massive shift in product demand. This detail is extremely important because manufacturers produce different product for businesses versus consumers at retail. As an example, bath tissue for restaurants and businesses is a very different quality, different packaging, and a different case pack. Now, if 30 to 40% of our product consumption shifts from food service and business use over to the retail sector in a matter of days, well, guess what? Manufacturers simply could not react fast enough. Over the past 2 decades, the US has undergone constant supply chain optimization to reduce waste and cost. Now, just-in-time manufacturing is this concept for knowing the demand forecast well enough in advance to only produce the product that will meet the immediate needs with minimal safety stock on hand. For most product at retail, manufacturers and retailers keep about 1 to 2 weeks of safety stock. This is the additional stock to weather out minor spikes in demand. However, the immediate shift from food service and commercial use over to the retail sector was so swift and so steep during the pandemic that all the safety stock was burned up in a matter of days. To make things worse, the manufacturers had an excess supply of product for the food service and commercial that were now just taking up space in their warehouse because that product demand took a massive nosedive. So with just-in-time manufacturing, it was not designed for a swing of 30 to 40% demand between sectors over a couple of days. And that in itself crippled our supply chain without prejudice. Everyone in the supply chain industry was left scrambling, and we were all asking ourselves, seriously, what the fuggle is a type of hop used in brewing beer? And I think it's great. You know what else is great? Hitting that like button. Thanks so much. Because of this change, manufacturers had to pivot operations to focus on retail packaged product and operate their facility with reduced labor. Many companies have stated that their operations have been running at 50 to 60% of their capacity during the pandemic due to a lack of labor. In most cases, it was stated that there was little or no issue with getting raw materials, but it really came down to the labor to produce the product. I'm saying this because I had firsthand conversations with many of these manufacturings at this specific time, and it was a similar story over and over. So under these conditions, manufacturers had to make decisions about how best to manage low capacity. Many have chosen to rationalize or limit their product offering to only focus on their top selling items. This reduces the workload required to clean, maintain, and set up different production lines. Products with high volume and high margins were definitely given preferential treatment. This is the reason why when you go to your favorite restaurant, you might only see 1/3 of the product listing that you saw prior to the pandemic, because the manufacturers simply aren't producing everything that they used to. Boiling it down, product in stores and restaurants is less consistent in availability, and unique fringe items simply aren't available. Once again, this will not fully be corrected until the labor constraint is normalized. The most optimal way to purchase and move product is in a full truckload. This is where our supply chain is heavily impacted right now. Regardless of how full a truck is, the cost for hiring the driver and the fuel needed to move from 2 points will be nearly the same whether the truck is full or not. For this reason, costs are minimized by filling the trailers to their capacity. For example, if a truck costs $4,000 to move product from California to Chicago, and the 48-foot truck is full at 40,000 pounds, the cost of freight is 10 cents a pound. Now, if manufacturers are producing less product and less assortment, then the ability to fill trucks begins to diminish because distributors will only buy what they know they can sell. With this prior example, let's say the seller in California has 50% capacity and only fulfills customer orders at 50%. They don't even tell the purchaser in advance. They simply fill the truck to 50% and send it on its way. The truck and the driver still cost $4,000 to drive to Chicago, but now it has 20,000 pounds on the trailer with the freight costing 20 cents a pound. Many companies work with less than full truckloads by setting up their supplier to be prepaid, which means the supplier manages the shipping, or they have a team specifically set up to manage their fleet to pick up multiple suppliers to fill a truck. But once again, if suppliers are at lower capacity and hit with labor shortages, then LTL issues are going to compound with products not being available in complete orders, appointments aren't kept, or the staging takes 5 times longer than normal. Trucks that were once full are now shipping LTL, and LTL loads are taking longer to fill up with the trailers even though they're only partially full. Adding even more problems to the situation, most suppliers will not even allow the purchasers to switch from managing their own loads to having the supplier manage it because, quite honestly, the suppliers can't find drivers either. All of these factors are leading causes for delays in shipments with higher expenses. According to Indeed.com, the average truck driver salary is $78,000. Now, in addition to this, Walmart recently released the fact that they are increasing the starting salary for all of their truck drivers. Regardless of your age, this is a compelling salary, and persons aged 18 to 20 may have a CDL that only operates within their state lines, which is intrastate. Most trucking jobs need drivers that can cross state lines, and this creates a bottleneck in capturing persons looking for careers right out of high school. For these individuals, it's doubtful that they're going to be willing to wait 3 to 4 years before they're willing to start in a truck driving position. At a time where drivers are in high demand, the government is looking at legislation to drop the age to 18 for CDL drivers in order to cross state lines. However, they've been looking to change this for years with no change. Well, there's no time like the present. Sadly, it requires a decoder ring to understand the requirements for working hours allowed for a CDL driver. For simplicity's sake, let's state that a driver's on-duty time is restricted to 14 hours each day from the time they are on duty. Within that 14-hour window, they can drive for a total of 11 hours and must take a break if driving for 8 consecutive hours. From there, the driver must take a 10-hour break before starting their next 14-hour window. Herein lies the challenge. Warehouses are short on labor and their ability to stage product and load the trucks is often falling behind schedule. During the pandemic, this has been a common issue for both the less than full truckloads and the full truckload shipments. There are circumstances where drivers are literally sitting around for the better part of the day, just simply waiting for warehouses to load their product. And the driver is handcuffed to only drive a few hours before hitting their threshold for their daily on-schedule limit. The rules do not accommodate for the situation because the rules were designed for a highly efficient supply chain, which we no longer have. This may seem completely foreign to most people, but one of the leading causes for our supply chain issues is a lack of parking for semi-trucks. During the pandemic, many states shut down all of their rest areas, and overall parking options have not kept up with the trucking demand. According to the American Trucking Association, the average trucker is parking their rig nearly an hour before their driving limit due to parking anxiety. This costs truck drivers roughly a 12% cut in their pay just because they have to park early. The alternative is that truck drivers may be forced to park illegally or in an unsafe location, which is dangerous for both the driver and for the rest of the drivers out there. Increasing the parking options requires a massive investment in infrastructure, and we are simply chasing the pain at this point, with no solution for years to come. Who would have thought that prices for a product are going up because there aren't enough parking spaces? Summarizing this all together, the domestic supply chain has multiple fractured areas causing costs to increase and negatively impacting the flow of goods. Until the pandemic becomes manageable, families and early retirees will not be rejoining the workforce anytime soon. Once that happens and open jobs begin to fill up, the production and transportation will be lagging behind. Assuming society acclimates to the pandemic during the summer of 2022, then workers will flow back to their jobs. With labor normalizing, manufacturing production will take roughly 3 months to ramp up, and then transportation will probably take another 6 months after that. So under the best of conditions, I estimate that our domestic supply chain will continue to be severely impacted until probably the spring of 2023. And with that, here's to 2023. Cheers. And yes, it's made with lots of fuggle.